Thank you very much to Architecture Foundation for allowing us this opportunity, and for all of you who have taken the time out to join us today. Thank you. I am the head of Department of Architecture and Landscape at Kingston University, London, and I have here with me Studio 2.2 lead team, Nana and Michael, with whom Bushra and I have had the privilege to collaborate with. We also have with us our second year students, Chanel, Sophie, Sami, Inga, Dan, Zayan, Sumaya, and Jemima, who will share their projects. Michael and I will start by introducing the studio thesis first, followed by Nana and Bushra's presentation of their research project, which was the main inspiration of the studio brief. Students will then present their experiences in Ghana and responses to the compound house. So in choosing the compound house, the studio thesis aimed to critique from the point of view of the global South, 3 aspects of modernity. So the modern concept of universal standards, the foundation of modern science in empirical knowledge, and Eurocentric anthropology. So to disrupt the standard, we were inspired by Bell Hook's view on language, where she begins with, like desire, language disrupts, refuses to be contained within boundaries. She goes on to quote from Adrian Rich's poem, speaking of language as oppression. And I quote, "This is the oppressor's language, yet I need it to talk to you." When I read these words, Bell Hooks writes, they make me think of standard English, of learning to speak against Black vernacular, against the ruptured and broken speech of a dispossessed and displaced people. Standard English is not the speech of exile. It is the language of conquest and domination. And yet, she goes on to say, it can also be the potential site of resistance. Michael, on to you.
These are 2 images of the 1920s housing project by Le Corbusier in Pessac, which is a suburb of Bordeaux in France. On the left is the project as Le Corbusier would have envisioned it. And on the right, we see how it was inhabited and adapted by the workers and their families, demonstrating the clash between the logic of the drawing board and the logic of life.
So Le Corbusier's approach to standardized housing reflects the dilemma of modernity's foundation in empirical knowledge. And here we pose the question of embodiment. Again, taking inspiration from Bell Hooks, I quote, "Trained in the philosophical context of Western metaphysical dualism, many of us have accepted the notion that there is a split between the body and the mind. Believing this, individuals enter the classroom to teach as though only the mind is present and not the body. From new discoveries in cognitive science, according to Lakoff and Johnson, in Philosophy in the Flesh, the embodied mind and its challenge to Western thought, the mind is inherently embodied. Thought is mostly unconscious. Abstract concepts are largely metaphorical. Reason is not in any way a transcendent feature of the universe or of disembodied mind. Instead, it is shaped crucially by the peculiarities of our human bodies, by the remarkable details of the neural structure of our brains, and by the specifics of our everyday functioning in the world."
The power of metaphor is beautifully described by Aristotle, who said, "The greatest thing by far is to be master of metaphor. It is the one thing that cannot be learnt from others, and it is also a sign of genius, since a good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in dissimilars." Jemima, in her project, demonstrates this by using the metaphor of the traditional Ghanaian umbrella.
If looked at closely, it is clear that the umbrella is specific in its construction and quite unlike the European model. In critiquing Eurocentric anthropology, we look at the concept of comparative anthropology, which, according to Bruno Latour, if we had never been modern, comparative anthropology then would be possible. He goes on to say, If we do not change the common dwelling, we shall not absorb in it the other cultures that we can no longer dominate, and we shall be forever incapable of accommodating in it the environment that we can no longer control.
Taking Aristotle's reference to these similarities and dissimilars, Samaya, in her project, makes an association between Aalto's courtyard of the experimental house located in Finland and her memory of an outdoor shower experience in her home in Somalia, which she translates into her version of the compound house. And now we turn to Nana and Bushra, who will present their research projects on the compound house.
So Nana and I started this research as a direct reaction to the lack of our own spatial experiences within architectural education. As people of colour, we felt explicitly excluded from the conversations around an experiential understanding of space. We also critique the trends of directly importing Western typologies to non-Western regions in terms of its architectural and cultural impact. We understand that this phenomenon has not happened in isolation and that it is a result of, amongst other complexities, modernism and the colonial history that continues to influence the present. Ultimately, in order to create richer responses to the multicultural demographic of contemporary cities, we need to understand the differences and unearth the commonalities that exist between the different ways in which we live. Next slide, please. Next slide. Suffice to say, it's early days. We will give a very quick overview of the research we are doing thus far. And although it is a separate project to Studio 2.2, we see the studio as one of our outputs. So, Nana is muted.
So the research aims to study historic types and also learn from them so that they can generate more thoughtful responses to urban growth and continuity in African and Western cities. The current lack of cultural critique in what is considered valid and therefore worthy of study is rooted in the Western canon, which remains male and European focused. This denies students and professionals alike a truly nuanced worldview of architectural history. We use the generic terms Africa, African, and the compound house with trepidation. We understand the baggage tied to terminology and the importance of language. The diverse histories and cultures during the pre-colonial and colonial periods, as well as the urban realities, make it ineffective to generalize the African continent. Although there are certain patterns and commonalities, the subject is complex and cannot be studied or described as one entity. Therefore, our research focuses on Ghana, more specifically, the historic and modern iterations of the compound house type found in Greater Accra, Central region, the Ashanti and Northern regions. Okay. Please, next slide, please, Sammy. Okay. Next slide, please. A typical compound house is a freestanding structure which can range from the organic to the more rectilinear accommodation. Historically, they have been occupied by large extended families within an agricultural working community. These dwellings have developed over time due to environmental, social, economic, and cultural influences.
Our research finds that the African cities have not developed in the same way as European cities, which to generalize are urban cores that rely on an agricultural hinterland. Rather, there is a focus on the ability to bring people together for either economic or ritual purposes. Next slide. It is not that medieval Africa has no stable urban hierarchy, but that is not tied to the landscape in the way implied by European models. Mabel Wilson, a designer and scholar at Columbia University, states that in order to deconstruct racial prejudices within the profession, and I'm quoting her now, first historians must expand the range of figures and objects we study to include the work of non-white subjects, including peoples previously deemed outside history, whose records were seen as not worthy of preservation. Essentially, the traditional tools used to understand and disseminate knowledge in Europe don't necessarily apply here. Another reason this research is so pertinent now is the urgency of climate change and the shift the world needs to make in order to attain global climate justice. And there's no climate justice without racial justice. Without focus on correcting these injustices, work on climate change addresses only the symptoms and not the root causes.
There are different types of compound houses in Ghana. These types respond to specific climatic conditions, the arid nature of the northern region, the tropical rainforest condition of the Ashanti region, and the coastal condition of the central and greater Accra regions. Religious ritual, art and cultural practices define the form, aesthetic, and symbolism found in these different types. The single-story dwelling is usually built using earth walls to enclose the sleeping areas and timber columns to support the roofs. Between the private spaces and the semi-public courtyard is a semi-private veranda, which is used for a variety of household activities. This typology is used by multiple families or several generations of one family, often sharing these spaces at any given time. The unroofed central compound serves a range of household functions, from food preparation to drying clothes, as well as being a space in which inter-household relations are nurtured. The advent of colonization and standardization of production methods and patterns of living has transferred the compound house to cities and has led to the process of repackaging its form into a denser, more compact two-story or more building type, generally made with more durable materials such as reinforced concrete and blockwork. Regardless, the type continues to persist in its variations across Ghana, shaping cities and ways of life.
In conclusion, the research is a critique of modernism. By understanding the specifics of a place, we aim to reevaluate the purpose of symbolic and cultural value through the spatial experience. Next slide. We do this with the hope of cataloguing a series of standards and values that we can implement into current London housing design guides, or even create a Ghanaian housing design guide that foregrounds compound house living for contemporary context. By shifting the lens of what we covered as architectural history, we hope housing can serve a more pluralist society. That was a very quick overview, and we hope to continue the research further.
So we now move on to, We now move on to hearing from Sophie and Chanel, who will talk about our studio's earlier research work and also report back on our field trip to Ghana.
Okay, so throughout this year, one of the prevalent themes that we explored revolved around the distinction and similarity between the Global South and the Global North. Starting the year, we studied Rye Lane and Peckham and gained insight into what makes this area unique. Following this study, we began our research of Accra and Kumasi in Ghana. Collectively, we gathered that Peckham embodies a distinctive identity consisting of many singular elements deriving from different places, creating varying combinations of culture. Amongst this is a great sense of community, of which resonates with ways of life seen in Ghana. Terraced houses, towering one after the other, impose a great degree of order, but suddenly that order is broken, interrupted by family-owned businesses and shops. These extensions have created a new relationship with the public, one where home and trade bear very little difference, and gradually has become the norm amongst and beyond Peckham.
Semester 1 brought the beginnings of a comparative study, comparing two compound houses as a studio, exploring what Luce here is describing, the link between tectonics, economics, and inhabitation. We compare thematic qualities such as function, architectural language, and analysing spatial sequences. From almhouses in London to Joe Addo's Inno-Native house in Ghana, we explored what it means to live communally. A few of the studio's Peckham projects from semester 1 included a dwelling for single mums, the natural 5 elements acting as the design narrative of the house. And there was a dwelling for the elderly that acts as a place for the continuation of life and not the ending of it.
So I chose to study the Inner Native house designed by Joe Addo. Built in 2004, it is a family residence which humbly boasts the idea of sustainability through using locally sourced materials and applying them appropriately in traditional yet commonly practiced methods of construction. In essence, the house possesses an ethereal atmosphere where attention to climate and structure resonate mutually. Through exploring and surveying the house, I observed a certain sense of order to the spaces in terms of its function.
I studied Beeston Gift's almhouses, built in 1834 in Peckham. My proposal was influenced by my studies of the almhouses by taking the concept of the gated private space and applying it to my own design, providing a courtyard area that can be overlooked by all residents and creating moments for conversation. Using tropical modernism as a self-led reference allowed me to achieve a space that allows people to behave in their true way without imposing on them, therefore creating a proposal that has an authenticity in responding to the local conditions. Dwelling differs from country to country, but the essence of it still stays the same. We use the place we dwell in as a safe place to eat, sleep, and wash, etc., creating habits, routines, and rituals. You can carry out the actions in a routine because you have to. The ritual is there because you want to. I wanted to create a space that provides opportunity for the want of rituals by taking the almhouses and Drew and Fry's work and applying it to my own. In November 2019, we made our trip to Ghana, staying in Jamestown, the historical town of Accra. Jamestown is the oldest district in Accra. The town planning, which you can see on the right, points to its historical past. It was intentionally built in a labyrinth-like layout to make marauding slaves traders lose their bearings during unsolicited captures. It seemed very easy once we arrived to identify several areas of interest that resonated with what we observed when visiting Rye Lane. For instance, it was common to see a dwelling's facade utilised as a shopfront, with perhaps a mother of a small family sitting roadside, selling local delicacies and dishes. Our next visit to the Nabuke Foundation saw the construction of the new concrete exhibition gallery by Berbel Müller and Jorgen Strohmeyer. The new gallery is a single volume raised up on pillars with a mezzanine, ceiling heights and walls used in such a way as to create a variety of spaces for exhibitions, performances and events, connecting to a growing network of cultural spaces in Ghana. To understand some of Ghana's tropical modernist heritage, we also visited the Accra Children's Library. This was built as a part of a post-independence campaign to improve library facilities and encourage the development of a homegrown architectural style. We also visited the Accra Community Centre by Drew, Fry, Drake and Lasden, built in 1957. This was funded by United Africa, a British-owned company, which was an attempt to disperse the threatening trade boycotts and rising civil unrest. The use of primary colours on shaded structural components and the vertical and horizontal rhythms and the brise-soleil are explicit examples of tropical modernism.
We then moved outside the city to Kopi Satoji's living art workshop and house. The use of materials at Kopi's house contrasts the scenery. The hard, heavy concrete building juxtaposes the soft gardens with the use of timber within the interior to reflect the surroundings. We then travelled to Kumasi, a city in south-central Ghana, home to the modernist campus of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, named after Ghana's first president. A tour of the university gave us more insight into the country's tropical modernist architecture, including the composition of forms, walls, door-to-door relations, ratios, and materials. Finally, we visited a traditional 18th century Ashanti compound house in Kumasi. Arranged around a courtyard, the building is constructed of timber, bamboo, and mud plaster with a 60-degree thatched roof. The building, its rich colour, and the skill of its decorations are the last surviving examples of a significant traditional style of architecture that epitomised the influential, powerful, and wealthy Ashanti kingdom of the late 18th century. In conclusion, despite the distance and seemingly great difference in continents, it's very clear from our now developed perspective that the UK and Ghana are actually, in terms of familiarity, two very small worlds, both sharing their uniqueness and letting their unexpected similarities evolve from each other and even boast a mutual and almost communal pride.
The projects you'll be seeing this evening explore the idea of communal living and the compound in their own way, thinking about design through precedent, observation, and translation. The site on North Airport Road in Accra sits within the shadows of the Villaggio scheme, which has become a reference point for the city. The decision to cite the project here was a deliberate one, a means of critiquing urban development of the city and proposing new buildings, which are rooted in the cultural understanding and rich fabric of the everyday city. We now start with Sammy, who will be presenting a project titled Coming Home.
So the basis of my proposal is to offer a space which can nurture people returning to their motherland and act as a brace for them throughout their journeys, both physical and intangible. I would hope for the project to ease a transition from the more secluded and private life of the West to the more informal and profoundly social life of their homeland. The ultimate goal for the proposal, if one exists, is for it to develop as the passengers move in and out, leaving their imprints and remnant characteristics in between. Perhaps the space may eventually become rich enough to inspire its occupants and add to their character rather than the contrary. This idea stemmed when I learned about the Year of Return. This is described to be a spiritual and birthright journey inviting the global African family back home, as people choose to return to the land of their ancestors, many of whom were enslaved and forcefully removed. Not only did I find this to be profound and powerful, but I also realized there were some aspects to which I could relate to closely myself, being a first-generation immigrant. A source of inspiration was people from countless different backgrounds coming together in one place to begin a new life, as I saw in Peckham. Throughout a study of the area surrounding Rye Lane, I met various people, all of whom had similar reasons for being where they were, to allow them to begin a new, more successful life. During our study trip to Ghana, I was also able to take ideas of tectonics and how construction can be made to conform to necessity, as I began to think about my own proposal. Some of these were the use of semi-permeable features to moderate conditions, as well as building to allow for unceremonious, more casual gatherings. I found the idea of uprooting oneself in the pursuit of a better life to be interconnected and perhaps overshadowed by the Friedensberg Houses. This is a project commissioned by the Danes Worldwide Organization and created by Jorn Utzon in Friedensberg, Denmark. Its aim is to provide ease of access into society to Danes who have lived and worked abroad for extended periods of time and have consequently lost connection with their homeland. The purpose is quite evident in the design of the homes themselves. The relationship between the private indoor spaces, the semi-public walled courtyards, and the fully exposed land on which the houses sit is reflected in the use of proportions, as well as the allowance of constant visual contact between these spaces. The main idea I took from the Friedensberg Houses was that of keeping constant contact with your surroundings and being able to access them regardless of where you may be. Lastly, I will speak on the importance of seclusion from profane everyday life in spiritual and sacrosanct spaces. For inspiration, I look towards places I believe do this successfully, which are places of worship. From Johan Selzing's Oster Church in Sweden and Alvaro Caesar's Santa Maria Church in Portugal, I learned the importance of proportion and the correlation between it and the purpose of the space. Simultaneously from the Madrasa Ibn Yusuf in Marrakesh and Le Corbusier's La Tourette Monastery, I learned how to integrate the private and somewhat profane spaces around a central reflective space within my own proposal. In terms of construction, I was interested in creating a structure that would employ the use of local craftsmen as well as the help of the general community, as well as building with locally available, more environmentally friendly materials and designing to protect from the harsh environments. As for the construction method, I wanted to use rammed earth construction as it held the design and ecological principles I sought in my project. This includes a school in Ghana by Andrea Tabocini and Francesca Vittorini, as well as the work of Robert Bolthauser and Francis Kerry's Naba Bilim School in Burkina Faso, along with the various structures I saw being constructed during my time in Ghana as well. And this decision was only cemented further by the previous experience I had gained creating rammed earth blocks and using them to design structure for myself. When responding to the site, I aimed to provide a sense of removal from the outside world, allowing for the returnees to enter a state of reflection. The site itself is surrounded by overbearing yet surprisingly unsubstantial architecture, which provides a sense of intrusion and forced conformity, from which I wanted to provide relief. The proposal is enclosed from all sides and employs techniques such as changes in levels to differentiate between spaces and their roles. I aim to keep proportions in line with this ideology when designing these spaces by keeping the residence rooms small, necessity-orientated, and pushed to the sides of the site, while keeping the communal central spaces much larger and central to the site, which would encourage people spending time in these areas as opposed to individual dwellings, working to nurture the connection between the people and their land. The communal space highlighted here again emphasizes the use of proportions and changes in levels, allowing for a physical disconnect as well as encouraging a behavioral one. Thank you all for your time, and I'll pass on to Inga.
So my project is called Encountering Spaces, where I study the places in between where unplanned and accidental encounters occur. The project finds its beginnings in Peckham, when our studio met for the first time outside Peckham Rye Station. I quickly became interested in the staircase in the middle of Rye Lane, leading up to numerous private dwellings above the busy high street. I investigated the threshold between public and private, particularly the transition from street level to the dwellings above the shops. Coming from a small town in Norway, my curiosity started with the fright of living too close to crowds and noise. I saw this threshold as a uniting element and eventually as a boundary. I also chose to study Ngona, a village built between 1946 and 1952 in Luxor by Hassan Fatih. The old Gona was a village located in the Valley of Kings, where its residents made their living poaching the graves of the pharaonic tombs, selling what they found. Whilst this was profitable for the villagers, however, it prevented the authorities from properly cataloguing and preserving the artifacts of the ancient pharaohs. Therefore, the Department of Antiquities decided to relocate the 7,000 peasants from their old village to this new housing. Hassan Fatih worked hard to include the new inhabitants in the design and construction process by interviewing them and studying how they lived. He encouraged local skills and set up a brick production yard nearby, putting even more locals to work. However, Fatih did not measure the importance of the formal collusion between domes and tombs within the population, whose superstition, the lack of governmental support, and its lack of revenue producing capacity led to the failure of the project. In my opinion, the people of Ngona were left no room to act. Instead of improving the peasants' place of living, their whole life was redesigned. I chose to further study one private dwelling of Ngona, and you can see a collection of many small rooms between 700mm thick walls. This was due to the mud brick and Nubian wall technique that forced them to make the rooms small, which then again led to many corridors and almost a labyrinth-like plan. And what I noticed was that they were all lacking communal spaces and only consisted of the most necessary rooms. And this led to the corridors actually becoming the communal space. And I now move on to Accra. While I was here, I stayed at the Jamestown Cafe, which I chose to study further. Maybe it was because I lived there for a few days and I learned to like something that is very different to what I'm used to. The streets of Jamestown had the same typical stepping down from the road as we can see in the traditional Ghanaian Ashanti housing. The semi-public spaces are for communication between the street and the home, a place open for everybody where socializing happens, inviting the people around. The courtyard was also an important place of communication between the inhabitants of the compound. My final project is located in a more affluent area to Jamestown, and I noticed when I was there that there was no activity on the street, and I wanted to make an inviting community that I felt was lacking through an encountering space between public and private. And with this plan, I created a communal apartment building where the residents share communal areas, and there's also a generous entrance sequence that allows chance encounters. The proposal comprises 22 dwellings for families and the elderly. The first communal area is 4 steps down into the open 2-story entrance sequence, and the threshold between the compound and the street. This becomes a place of opportunity. And the entrance sequence takes you to the courtyard, the communal space for the inhabitants of the compound house. A place for tradition, like eating, for instance, where the elderly are passing on knowledge in the communal kitchen, where you can sit outside and smell the food cooking and share it around large tables. On the ground floor, there are 3 dwellings for the elderly couples and larger dwellings for families in the 3 stories above. Living tight means big open spaces aren't always the most useful, but actually having the opportunity to close off and divide rooms. For example, if you have a family member over, the dining area can be turned into an extra bedroom by closing off the folding doors to offer moments of privacy within the compound as well. The spaces in between are where everyday activity happens. For example, where elderly people are sitting in the shadows, keeping an eye on the kids playing. My project develops from Peckham to Accra, reflecting on different precedents and the spaces in between where the unplanned encounters occur. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dan Mars. This is a citadel for multi-generational living. The traditional Ashanti compound house is from a time before colonization. Architecture is how we define ourselves. It enables our rituals and culture. And as such, many of these traditional shrine houses were destroyed and neglected by the colonial governments, resulting in lost knowledge and heritage, with only 10 shrine houses still remaining today. The traditional compound house consists of 4 rectangular structures, each serving a purpose: drumming, cooking, living, and worship, all surrounding a communal courtyard. To understand this type, I wanted to explore it both spatially and tectonically through model making. Due to the climate, the house consists of verandas instead of rooms that allow for fluid inside-outside living. The foundation is raised half a meter to allow for people to sit around the courtyard in a communal manner. The compound house uses the wattle and daub technique. To understand the limitations and strengths of this technique, I made a 1:5 fragment. A 0.5 meter clay, water, and sand rammed earth mixture is laid, creating the foundation, elevating the building from the ground. Then timber lengths are used to create pillars, outlining a wall. Thatch is then weaved between these lengths, creating the wattle of the wall. To finish, a clay mixture is used to build up the wall, making it more durable to protect against the elements. It became clear that the house is about the fluidity of inside-outside dwelling. The structure is not permanent, but rather a living structure that requires constant upkeep, one that grows and decays with its inhabitants. With increased urban living came the modernization of the compound house. The main change is its scale. With larger multi-generational families living together, they require more space. This manifests into the creation of private rooms adjacent to the veranda. Commercial space is often created on the street-facing facade to generate revenue for the family. Although being different in its construction and organization, much like the traditional compound house, it acts as a living structure. It is able to grow with its inhabitants' needs and wants. Walls can be added or removed, and rooms can be added to create larger compounds to fit the family's needs, size, and financial capabilities. The Kumasi compound house plays with the transition from public to private. Through looking at the different spaces, it can be seen that the most important space is not the communal courtyard, but rather the veranda adjacent to it. The veranda and courtyard are explored in this painting, highlighting its communal and working nature. Ghana's colonial hangover has still created a society of extraction, which results in location close to the international airport gaining affluence. To the north of the site is an example of directly imported Western design, the villaggio. It was then my challenge to create a contemporary urban compound house, drawing from its roots, both ignoring the villaggio while still responding to its scale. When visiting the site, this drawing was made to show the idea of Western architecture looking down on Ghanaian architecture, imposing itself literally on higher ground and disregarding its surroundings. Therefore, 3 main ideas were outlined in my design narrative. Through building my proposal into the hill, I combat the notion of Western architecture being above the local architecture by creating a level ground. I then use this material as rammed earth and concrete to echo the traditional building techniques and materials used throughout Ghana. Lastly, changing the presence of walled-off compounds and instead letting the building act as the enclosure, creating a civic presence in the area. Inspired by the working yard, I celebrate the ritual of washing clothes, an activity that is often hidden and not given space. Large families often have people working for them with household tasks. I didn't want to hide this, but rather celebrate the task and these people in a respectful way while inviting this work to become social. To understand what this space would look like, I needed to understand the process of washing clothes, to design a space to allow for these rituals to continue, whilst making this a socially engaged ritual. Water is therefore crucial in my project. This meant the presence of a water tower that would collect and recycle, also responding to the scale of the villaggio. How water is transported through the site is explored through aqueducts and underground systems. The communal washroom located under the water tower creates a socially engaged ritual for its residents. The development is designed to continue tradition and rituals, while not giving up contemporary luxuries. The interior of the flats are easily modified to fit and grow with the needs of its inhabitants. The flats are designed with a variety of spaces varying from public to private, able to house many different activities and events, allowing for fluid inside-outside living. This section is showing the working communal yard, celebrating the next urban evolution of the compound house. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sumaya Hussain, and this is my project Earth Dwellings. So reflecting on my final proposal, it became clear that my design process for both semester 1 and 2 relied heavily on my personal experiences and memories of when I visited Somalia. During semester 1, I designed a fabric store as my grandmother used to run her own back home, and it's where she taught my dad how to sew. In order to express the importance of community, I had decided to design a space in between the house and the fabric shop to be used for people to gather and learn the art of sewing. During our visit to the inner native house, I remember one of the first things that struck me was that even though there are no stairs or corridors within the house itself, when you move through the rooms, you can feel that you're entering a different space. The bamboo shower, as well as the doors that led from the bedrooms to the veranda, all influenced my project. I found similar qualities in the Home for Living Art by Kopi Satoji. These were his own personal projects where the outside spaces, as well as the vegetation, were greatly considered and appreciated. For example, in both buildings, there was seating provided to observe the surrounding landscape. Similarly, in Alvar Aalto's experimental house, Aalto was able to experiment and explore the use of materials as well as spaces for his architecture. Through a series of diagrams, it became obvious that the courtyard was the center of this project. The walls surrounding the courtyard frame views towards the lake and act as filters, blocking direct sunlight, therefore allowing the courtyard to function as a gathering space, even during the warmer parts of the day. These studies laid the foundations of my proposal. I began by creating diagrams demonstrating the sun paths of the site. This research has allowed me to select the locations of my courtyards as well as the placings for any vegetation. One of the key aspects of my design are the communal spaces and how the residents would experience each as they move from one to the other. All three are characterized by their locations as well as their functions. Using Aalto's 9x9 courtyards, I created three thematic courtyards. The first was designed as a sitting room. Initially, a space where the residents would be able to enjoy reading a book or relax in a calm environment. However, this went from semi-public to public as I included the design of a public library next to it, allowing for interactions between the residents and the rest of the community to occur and grow. For this communal space, I decided to create level changes and step down from the road as I saw this quite frequently in Accra. My second communal space is the more sociable, louder courtyard of the three. It is also a sitting area where there is only cushioned floor with a metal corrugated roof sheltering it from the rain. I decided to use a metal sheet for this courtyard to experiment with the use of sound within a space. My third and final courtyard is the quietest due to its location. It is towards the back of the site and on a lower level to the rest of the buildings and is surrounded by vegetation. Researching Geoffrey Bower's architecture, I came to understand the relationship between the interior of a house to the exterior courtyards. I was inspired by Bower's plans, which often took the courtyard as the center of the project, to design private gardens separated from the shared spaces to allow for rituals to occur. I used sliding doors instead of windows and walls to distinguish between what is inside and outside for both the living rooms and kitchens. This study also created the opportunity to design something which I had experienced on a trip to Somalia, the external shower. The outdoor toilet is also something that I saw whilst walking through Jamestown, as well as the idea of the toilet as a wet room. Designing both the external shower and toilet, I was able to fully study and show the rituals people do outside. For example, to cook food, wash clothes, and to make wudu, the cleansing of the body that Muslims undertake before prayer. In terms of materiality, I looked to more traditional materials, as well as Mariam Kamara, who used compressed earth bricks. We also had a tectonics project where we experimented with rammed earth. And lastly, these are my final models showing my proposal as a whole. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Zion, and I will be presenting A Village in a City. Throughout the year, my projects have been centered around my experiences in Europe and Africa. In Peckham, I wanted to explore both both cultures, as 50% of the inhabitants identify as African or Caribbean. For this project, I designed a multi-generational home. Inspired by my own journey, I decided to design for both my immediate family in the UK, as well as my extended family in Benin. Childhood experiences of eating on the floor or on the mat has always been the norm, and I had to quickly adapt to tables and chairs upon arrival to the UK. Although it was not completely new to me, I found it somewhat difficult to adjust. Therefore, the dining area became the main focus of the house. I designed a circular core that sunk 2 steps into the ground to create a seating area. This meant that the residents could sit on cushioned floor, yet feel as though they're seated on a chair. For our second semester project, we were located in Ghana with similar conditions. On our trip, I had noticed that most of the homes had a shop front, which hosted a place of business that brought in revenue for each home. This was an aspect that I wanted to incorporate in my project, and I also wanted to incorporate the daily rituals I had seen. Aside from the experiences that I was exposed to in Ghana, I also looked at for inspiration in the Lost Villa by Jonathan Wolfe, located in Kenya. It is a multi-generational family home that consists of 3 homes connected by a roof. I explored the interior and exterior spaces within the project through a series of diagrams to understand the essence of the villa. In response to this, I created a veranda space that felt like an external room. I was particularly interested in how the interior and exterior spaces were represented through the use of verandas. I went back to how the veranda and the external rooms were represented in Kopi Satoji's house in Kumasi, as well as the Ashanti house, which included veranda spaces that opened up to the courtyard. I wanted to have individual buildings as Jonathan Wolfe had done in the Lost Villa. However, rather than connecting them with a single slanted roof, I wanted to allow for an idea of individuality for the residents. I created some alleys that I imagined would feel like roads. Here I explored the alleys by visiting Lincoln's Inn to have a physical experience of what it feels like to be in a tight space and to really understand how tight is too tight. I decided my theme and the type of people I wanted to design for. I wanted to design for small and large families. Therefore, I designed a compound house, a compound for 10 to 12 families. In my proposal, I decided to make the dining a shop front. It created a small communal gathering space. The dining is at the front of the proposal, facing the street. The idea behind the dining is that it would be owned by the residents, which would be used as a source of income for their families. There is also a semi-private communal courtyard located 2.4 meters above street level, and it can be used by both the residents and the customers as the dining for a secondary semi-private eating area. The individual dwellings consist of 2 types, the flat type for a family of 2 to 4, and a maisonette type for a family of 4 or more. I wanted the dwellings to face the courtyard. The maisonette house type especially represented the compound house in the way which the homes and the courtyards were connected. Thank you. I will now pass on to Jemima.
Hi, The Umbrella is the Collector is the title of my project. It's communal housing for the elderly. I quote from Lino Bilbaldi. The problem was to create an environment that was physically sheltered, that offered protection from the wind and the rain, but at the same time remaining open to everything poetic and ethical, even in the wildest of storms. Whilst observing Peckham, I really noticed that everyone brought their own personality to the place that they lived. A space for everyone where they could create their own dwellings. Architecture Without Architects by Bernice Rodolsky was a book which really resonated with me after my experience in Peckham. During the study trip, I reflected during the Christmas holidays And it really it made me realise that in the cold months, it was really hard to connect to Ghana as it was so hot. And all I wanted to do was be inside. And I took away the essence of shelter and how everyone in Ghana is searching for shelter from the sun, using natural and built architecture. Whether the shelter is temporary or permanent, with the use of inside and outside spaces, places with hospitable fronts where people can gather, street sellers, neighbours, they can all gather in deep thresholds and not intrude into the private rooms or dwellings. Lots of columns with overhanging roofs for outside rooms, undercroft spaces with large columns which can divide spaces up to allow for breeze and shelter. I really enjoyed the organised chaos that we saw in Accra. We stayed in hostel Jamestown Cafe. This is a reflection of the plan drawing that I did after we came back from the study trip, where we would share meals, dance and sleep. The hostel hosted events and exhibitions and a place where everyone could really gather and celebrate. The architecture was colourful fabrics and short partitioned walls and communal toilets. This is Accra Children's Library by Nixon and Broyes in 1966, with outside classrooms and open doors with fold-back doors, which allowed for the classrooms to be outside but still enclosed for concentration, with generous stairways which gave me an understanding of the civic space. This is Accra Community Centre by Jane Drews and Maxwell Fry in 1957, with deep thresholds and a courtyard space for people to gather and talk and play. Also, Joe Addo's wraparound porch house, which has leftover spaces for time alone and reflection. Also, my personal favourite, Kunst University open clubhouse for the tutors who live on campus to eat and gather in the space. On the ground floor, there is an undercroft space for dining, and on the second floor, a more intimate enclosed evening room with sofas. The narrative of my project was shaped by the painting by Godfred Donker, a contemporary Ghanaian artist, a rendition of a painting from the 1800s of a brightly coloured Ashanti umbrellas. These nomadic shelters symbolise your social status. Like the English hat, the bigger the umbrella you are, the more important you are. A celebration of the wealth, and up to 16 people travel under one umbrella. I began to study the anatomy of the umbrella, how it is assembled, and the way of using it by making it out of wood and string weaving. This is different to the Western umbrella made from nylon and wire, and almost a metaphor for my learning about my personal experience of the programme this year. I changed my Western making techniques in definition for the words, as after all, the etymology of the umbrella means sunshade. My project reflects the ideas to create a proposal that allows for flexible working spaces and different programs using columns, undercroft spaces and structures that can be adjusted by partitions or moving parts. In order to have a presence on the site, I produced an extravagant decorative but also tectonic architecture with its own identity that could be known in the community. The building must stand out like the brightly coloured Ashanti umbrellas at a festival, a place for people to collect. And here, so you can see my ideas that I've learnt during the project in my work.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for listening. I now conclude with a few thank yous. Firstly, to Mary Vaughan Johnson and Andrew Clancy for supporting the studio's agenda through inviting us to teach within the Department of Architecture and Landscape. To our amazing and generous supporters who helped us raise over £10,000 through KU Backer, making our trip to Ghana possible. To the generous organisations and individuals who helped us in organising our trip to Ghana, our visiting critics for engaging with the studio's agenda, and to the architectural practices who generously invited us on building visits to their projects. And finally, a big thank you to all the members of Studio 2.2 whose hard work has made this evening possible. Thank you, and we now open the floor to questions.
Okay, so that was a bit of a marathon, but if anybody's got any questions, if you could put them in the chat, and I think Rosie's monitoring the chat. I'll have a look at it as well. Yeah, it'd be good to have a bit of a chat about this, wouldn't it? So,
Michael, it looks like Joe Addo may be in the room. I don't know if he's able to speak. Maybe not.
We have a question.
I've just made Joe a co-host so he can jump in now.
Fabulous.
Joe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Fantastic. So
yes.
Happy you could join. Thank you.
Yes. I'm enjoying it greatly.
Fantastic.
I think we have a question from Eric.
So it was Eric Giraldo asking about a particular type of construction. So if we could unmute Eric and allow him to ask his question.
He's unmuted.
Hi guys, thank you for that. I was really intrigued by all your work. I just wondered whether maybe I missed it, but there was a few projects there, especially a few precedents where they had thatched roof, and it's I guess it's a material that's quite abundant in terms of water reed in a lot of those countries, especially in the more kind of undeveloped areas. And I wondered if anyone kind of explored that. I know here in the UK we've kind of really mastered the art of thatching, and we've really kind of got to grips with how to make those kind of roofs really waterproof, watertight, I guess. And yeah, I mean, I've looked into it before, and they can last up to 50 years, obviously, with some rethatching every 15 years or so. But I just wondered if anyone had explored it in their projects.
Okay, I'll just start because something occurred to me. I used to live in Norfolk, and I think when I might be speaking out of turn, but I think that they're like, in this country, there are sort of, and there's like a handful of people left that can do this, that can do thatching. Is that right? Do you know about that, Eric? I mean, because one of the things with that type of, I guess, historical approach to tectonics and construction is that you're kind of dependent on the knowledge not remaining among people. I'm not sure what the situation is in Kumasi, where the thatched roof you saw was.
Can I add to that also? This is Joe Addo.
Yes, I was hoping that you would come in.
So it's the same. It's the same story as in Ghana. Even in Ghana, they're very in the southern part of Ghana. You know, I did a thatch building near Cape Coast a few years ago, and I had to import a gentleman from the Volta region, for example, and
yeah.
even the reeds, the thatch itself, it's very special reeds which are used for that, and that's not even grown it's not even grown in most parts of Ghana. You have to get it from specific villages and parts of the country. So it's you're right. It's almost extinct. The whole culture of making thatch roofs, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. To add to your point as well, yeah, there are only a handful of people in the UK that still do it. They belong to the Master Thatcher Association, and I think I've spoken to them before, and what they've said is, there's two sides. Obviously, the thatching techniques that they use in these kind of areas are quite primitive still, and however, if they are shown how to correctly kind of use those materials to its kind of most efficient form, then they would prove to be more popular. But it's also based on some literature. It's also in from a cultural stance seen as a sign of poverty, which I couldn't disagree with more with, but it's seen as if as you're not. It's kind of a symbol or status of in your social standing. If you have a thatched roof, you're from a lower kind of income family, but it's proven to be quite popular again. I mean, I'm from South America, and I grew up seeing thatched roofs everywhere, and they still stand. I mean, I just think they look beautiful, to be honest. But it's a shame that we're kind of losing that, and we're still losing those experts. But then again, you're right. I guess it's mainly because you do need a very special type of water reed or in order to do it.
Yeah, I mean,
it really depends on the area that you're building with, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of factors. I think it's to do with the sort of a kind of, as you've alluded to, a kind of idea about progress, which is probably not necessarily progressive.
Right.
But if we move on, there are a couple of other questions. Warren Moore, thank you, Eric. Rowan Moore is wanting to ask something about compound houses. So can we unmute Rowan Moore?
He's unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I'm sorry if I missed something about this, but I'm really interested in the kind of social structures that compound houses reflect, because it's clearly not the 2 parents, 2 kids nuclear family. So I'm wondering if they are for extended families, or if more than one family lives in them, or I'm presuming they vary quite a lot from one region to another. But
they vary a lot. Yeah, the most typical scenario you'd get is that it's multi-generational. But also in cities now, what happens is the individual rooms are often kind of rented out to different people. So they would become like kind of renting in London. So you could be an individual who rents out a room now. But I guess they started as a singular family that would kind of inherit the plot or own the plot, and then your extended family would kind of grow as your compound grew.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I think the students can contribute to this discussion too, because this is something they very much learned when they were there. And I think each one of them, in fact, responded in their own kind of personal, they had their own narrative as to what that compound house might be and who might live there. So I think it'd be nice to hear from them, actually.
My dwellings were for elderly couples or single elderly people who would accommodate for their grandchildren while their children went to work. So it was a place for young to come and learn together.
And Chanel, I think you had a story.
Hello, Mary.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. With my proposal, mine. I guess from my tutors' perspectives, they may have seen me struggle to understand the concept of separate dwellings for for multiple families. In my case, I was trying to make for families, but I wanted it all to be under one roof to like further emphasize the whole idea of multiple people just living together on one compound as opposed to just being separate separate kind of dwellings. So It kind of just imposes that kind of way of living amongst everyone that does live there, even if they're not necessarily related to each other. So, yeah.
Yeah, Chanel, let me tell you that's the contemporary modern housing in Ghana, and privately owned though. That these landlords, we call them chamber and halls. They're very common. Most people in the city, in the urban areas, live in this condition, where you rent a room and you share everything else. It's very commonplace now.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the whole idea around, I guess, my proposal. So yeah.
Yeah. So you're on the right track. You're onto something there. But what hasn't happened is a reinterpretation even of that.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think one of the things that that we found when visiting Ghana is that there's this new phenomenon where that these compound houses become these passenger houses that Joe told us about, where those rooms are rented out individually.
Right.
I think that was kind of a model that we all took further, and kind of saw these rooms as apartments or dwellings in themselves, to kind of create a scheme where there's still flats and private accommodations, but inviting communal living and communal work and conversation between residents that I think in many places, especially in the Western world, we are currently failing to deliver. So I think that's the next step, is creating modern houses. Yeah.
Sorry, can we unmute Joe?
Yes. The one thing that has disrupted this communal interaction thing is the advent of takeaway food.
Wow.
No one cooks anymore. Everybody goes and buys food on the roadside, and then they eat in their rooms. Because I was raised when I was a child, my grandmother, cooking time was a big deal. Everybody, but now nobody even cooks in the main courtyard space anymore. So the advent of takeaway Chinese and Indomie and fried rice and all that rubbish killed the compound house star.
This is why I personally wanted to have like a dining as my shop front, because in my experiences in Benin as well, eating, being as a family has always been just the normal thing to do. Every time we gather together, it's always to eat. So I wanted to bring that back to Ghana, I guess, with my proposal. And so the courtyard essentially is a space where normal activities can happen, but also the pounding of the fufu and just cooking and just doing.
Yeah, that's great. I think we need to move on. We've got a lot more questions coming in. So, but thanks for your insights there, Zayan and Joe and Chanel. And
I must apologize for my technical problems here. I'm a dinosaur. I'm a dinosaur. I'm from the old school. Sorry.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one. So Alicia, we've got a question from Alicia next. So if you could be unmuted.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I have two questions. So my first question is, what were the biggest lessons you've learned whilst challenging non-Eurocentric narratives within such a colonial setting in academia now as graduates? And then my next question I had, but I have lost, so so sorry. Hopefully I can write it again. Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, Alicia.
Hello.
Yeah, you had another question?
Yes, I've forgotten it, so I will.
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
We'll answer the first one. So I don't know if Nana or Bushra or Mary want to address that.
I'll start with Alicia's, the first part of Alicia's question, talking about reflecting on it as a graduate. I think that's what led to Bushra and I starting this research project, having both been past educated in the UK and then going to university in the UK. Architecture is talked about in a way that perhaps doesn't allow particularly people of colour to bring to bear their own cultures and traditions that's seen as outside of the academy. And I think for us, we both understood architecture to be something that's experienced and lived, and that everyone has an experience to bring with them. And so through conversations over lots of years, we wanted to explore something jointly. And for us, the compound house being the thing that over a kind of large continent links all these countries, but was something felt like a good point to start. And there's also, as has been explored today, something that could generate more meaningful architecture on the continent, and also actually I think in the UK, given that the situation we find ourselves in over the last month, where community and the communal become essential. I think it's important to start thinking about these things. And to answer your question in terms of decolonizing, I think it's basically looking further beyond the things that we've come to accept as sort of things that we should look at. So looking at the everyday, and I think for people of colour, it's also exploring our everyday and the things that we bring with us.
Right.
I think there's also a kind of huge, so look, like with the idea of like non-Eurocentric perspectives, non-Eurocentric history, a huge amount of information and knowledge that we just aren't exposed to at all. And I guess from our experiences living in Kenya, living in Ghana, and being taught about the kind of African history and like Kenyan history and Ghanaian history separately, we knew that there was this like kind of large pot of information that was there, but we were just not looking at because, you know, we were in the UK and it didn't have anything to do with our lives here. But you know, for us, it did have something to do, quite crucial. So just wanting to bring in that information that we had, that knowledge that we had into our own architectural experiences, into the work that we produce, because often, you know, almost on a daily basis, we would have to repress all that knowledge and kind of forget about it. You know, there's all this other knowledge, European knowledge that we needed to learn, right? So, yeah, it's partly the need to bring that to light.
Great. And sorry, my last question was, I know that for the studio, you created a crowdfunding initiative, and I'm just wondering how can people better support you in the future to make sure this is like a sustainable project that continues and evolves.
I'll let the students speak to that because they did a lot of fundraising and
and Mary as well for kind of organising it with KU, with the University,
Can I say something?
Yes.
Please, Joe.
You know, one of the things that I think architecture education worldwide suffers from is how we depict the narrative. You know, it is so architect specific. You know. Hello.
Yes.
We can still hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I would say is, as we describe our context, let's find ways where ordinary people can relate to it immediately. It's accessible, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I love Nigerian hip hop music. Those videos, they're so direct, you know? They're able to capture the contemporary nature of the African scene, space, right? And always imbue it with some of the traditional elements. But no matter where you are from in the world, you relate to it, you know? And I always love reading. If you go on YouTube and you listen to the work of the musical, let's say Fino or Davido or what's his name, Humble Smith, one of these great guys, you know? And then you read the comments, the comment section under the YouTube. People from all over the world that say, I'm not from Nigeria, but I get what they're saying, you know? And that's what architecture must try to do. People don't have to be in our space to relate to what we're trying to say. I think historically, it's been a purview of educated people, and we have to break that cycle. That's how we decolonize architecture, you know?
Absolutely.
We have to find ways of...
Yeah. I think, Joe, it really does go back to the experience of the everyday life. And I think what connected us as tutors is we were all raised and grew up in Africa. And for me, my PhD is on toilets. And the reason I ended up looking at toilets is exactly for what you're arguing, Joe, is what's a critique on the language we use and how we distant ourselves from the experience of
Right.
And I was particularly keen to talk about rituals and everyday rituals, and to question also what we consider private and public, because born and raised in Zim, the collective and the community always took precedence over the individual. When I moved to the US, I had to adapt to a way of thinking where the individual took precedent over the collective. And so in architecture, when we talk about private and public, we assume those meanings, but we don't. For me, they didn't. I couldn't. It didn't resonate what was being discussed in architecture from my own experience. And I think this is what the four of us were really working with students to try to bring their voice of their experiences to the table, because I think that's where we can really begin to talk about architecture in a meaningful way.
Right. I agree.
Okay, I think we need to move on. We've got loads of questions here. So I think Precious is next.
I couldn't seem to unmute her.
Oh, can you hear me?
Great. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect. So this is kind of a question to the student, kind of talking about language, which we started on. It was kind of like, did you ever, in kind of like your casual conversations about your projects, ever think the language I'm using, or like the words I'm using to describe these buildings in themselves, are like quite colonialist? You have to start questioning a language that you use to describe this architecture. I'm just kind of thinking back to a lecture I had, and we started using the word primitive, and then kind of thinking of kind of like what comes with the word primitive. So there's a question to the students in your casual conversations about architecture. Did you ever have to question the way in which you describe architecture?
I think we've had a lot of conversation about this. Like we've started every day in studio every week with different topics, and we've had visiting guests from other countries, and we've had a lot of discussions on this, and we've also disagreed a lot, I think, and I don't know, what do you think?
You want to give some examples, maybe?
Yeah, give us an example.
It's private and public and semi-private. we always told, don't use those words. They're a bit too Eurocentric for like the way that, because it was kind of like these invisible lines in the.
I remember from you, Inga, when we were in Ghana, and you said the thing, because we had a session where everybody sort of talked about what they had learned from the experience. And I remember what you said, which really stuck, is that you realized how important the community was, in how everyone, when they met you, forgot everything they were doing and focused on getting to know who you are and wanted to know how you're doing, how's your family doing. And that was a very essential way of greeting. It wasn't just hello, but you spend some time actually talking about who you are, what's going on in your life, how is your family doing, and so on. And I think
I also
that experience in a good way.
Yeah, and I think it was very different in Ghana than, for example, in the UK, when I'm at the grocery store and they ask me like, how are you doing? And I don't feel like they actually want to hear how I'm doing. But in Ghana, they really actually took the time to listen. And also a thing that me and Nana talked about just a few days ago was using the word class, the class system, and which I think is, for me, it can sound, it's just weird to talk about. I don't know if that's a Norwegian thing or where everyone's mostly the same. But it feels like can be a very you know, using those words can feel like you're looking down on someone. I don't know. I think you should be careful using those words.
Right. That's a very good. Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, carry on. Just want to make a final comment. Otherwise, there's more questions. Vasilina Vasilev has a question about sustainability.
Hi, yeah, Vasilena. Hi, everyone. Really lovely to see the work. Mary had invited me. I don't know if you guys. Oh, hi, Mary. Yeah, Mary and I, we know each other from when she was at De Montfort University, and so I'm super interested in what you guys are doing, and I think it's a very, very relevant topic, especially since, you know, when we're, you know, you kind of charged with really questioning what you've been used to seeing so far in terms of aesthetics and modernity, and really then focusing on things that are incredibly relevant to some of the current both social and environmental sustainability goals that we're starting to really look into. And so I think, I mean, the research was really fascinating to see, and I'm just kind of curious to hear more about the students' perspective on how it changed with regards to sustainability and resilience, and in terms of material, but then also performance, because a lot of the works that you saw were very kind of low tech and really focused on making and materiality. And as a result, they're, you know, highly performative in terms of, you know, cooling spaces and creating more, you know, habitable interiors. So I'm just curious to see how your perspective on that changed and how might you apply that to future projects?
That's a question for the students.
Yeah, students. I think you remember that the students are only in their second year of architecture. So this is quite, I'm really enjoying the questions because it's expected from your students that you understand a lot of these things already. So your projects have come across very strong. So I think I'm so proud of you. So to you now.
Yeah, I don't, just to start off on that, I think this was for me a bit of a daunting task, because I started off looking at the traditional Ashanti compound house, which, like I said before, uses a thatch roof system and a wattle and daub wall, using you know, primitive techniques, and it was then a challenge to somehow modernize these and bring these into an urban compound house. And one of the challenges that we had with this is that we also had a tectonics section and base study on the side of this. And every week we had a meeting, it was a kind of argument with the tutor that was helping us, trying to get rid of these materials deemed of, you know, more primitive, and trying to get, you know, more concrete, relying less on the materials themselves. So it was definitely a struggle to try to modernize these materials and bring them to a more modern urban setting. But I think through that process, that also made us, through that uncertainty, it made us have to really research these materials. And I think you see that throughout all our projects, we start to really hone on on how these materials work and how they can be used in a modern setting, which I think all of us will definitely take forward in future projects.
Thanks, Dan. And anybody else want to say something about that from the studio? You're all very quiet.
No, I just wanted to add to that. I think for me, it was more of broadening my sort of scope on materiality when designing, because at the beginning of this project, I wanted to use concrete, but I didn't really question why am I using concrete in Africa, or like where the site is Accra. So I think throughout the year, it was me sort of questioning myself, saying, okay, so why are you doing this? Why are you using earth? How does it relate to what I'm doing, and what does it say? I think for me, it was more of just researching what I was using and why I was using it. Just want to say that.
Thanks, Samaya. Excellent. I can just add something. There's a point that's raised in my mind, and it's kind of related to the thatch as well. We are kind of in I guess a socio-economic productive reality, and that's the real challenge to employ some of these technologies in the real world, Vasilena. So I think, for example, during Nana's and Bushra's presentation, they alluded to the fact that kind of concrete and sheet metal is kind of substituted for the older materials, thatch and mud brick. And that isn't just to do with function, that's to do with capitalism, for want of a better term, creating materials to be sold in the market. That they weren't needed when they were first, they weren't necessarily needed when they were first developed, but they were advertised, and people were made to think that they were better. And now that's established, and that's what you're fighting against. So now to do a thatched roof, for example, it would be really, really expensive as compared to like a sheet metal roof, for example. And that's the real issue that you're facing when you're trying to design things in the real world. So
that's a European issue too, as well. I mean, it's an issue we have in London with architecture we're making here, a kind of fight against standardized products, which of course, all clients will go towards because it's cheaper and, efficient and can be reliable. So yeah, it's how do you create something beautiful and effective, and also relates to
sustainable
and climatically. Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is the solution probably lies further upstream. So it lies in kind of more in the political realm, which architects can still work in. But we have to change the kind of system we're working in order to affect that, I would say. If anybody else has got anything to say about that, I think it's quite an important one. Otherwise, we will move on. Somebody else is going to say something?
Denver, right?
That's the next question.
Hi. Yes, hi. Hi, Mary.
How are you?
All right, and you? Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody. I love the backgrounds. I love the perspectives and the colorful backgrounds. Very interesting. Mary, I did post a question. By the way, sorry, my name is Denver Hendricks. I am the head of Department of Architecture in Johannesburg in South Africa. So I'm extremely proud of you, Mary, and your students to see such great work and dealing head on with such difficult topics and topical issues, dealing with critical regionalism, dealing with colonialism, learning from the South. It's very refreshing. And at the same time, there's this idea of a double, one has to be wary of a double booby trap, in a sense that this work is not, and I don't think it is not framed as a colonial kind of attempt to in the way that it's studied, because it's not. So I think it's framed really well. It's done in an empathic way. It's done in a way that respects learning from the South, from materials, technologies, the social aspects. So I think that's incredibly strong. I just had I picked up on a note which I think Joe Addo mentioned, which I thought was quite powerful. That role of the courtyard, his note about people no longer using the courtyard for dining or cooking, is now, I'm assuming, no longer fulfilling that role. So the question for me I had then, what is the role of that courtyard? And then what was the compound house, to what degree was dining and cooking influenced the design of the compound house? Was it because of the cooking and dining? And then how does one reimagine the compound house today? Because Jaida spoke about living there every day, being true to the tradition, but now is the tradition still compound house? If you had to design that compound house, and takeaway is now the dining experience, then what does that actually do for the tradition? Do you chuck the tradition out, throw the baby out of the bathwater? Do you reinterpret the dining and cooking experience that he talks about when his grandmother used to cook? These are all very interesting kind of proposals that one can start to reimagine.
Great question.
Yeah.
Is Joe still here?
Well, maybe Zayan can respond, since that was sort of your focus, wasn't it?
That's true, yeah.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can, okay,
yes.
Good.
Okay. So with my project, initially I was just looking at my experiences, because I'm not from Ghana, but I'm from Benin. It's just one or two countries to the left of it. We have the same sort of cultures, just food outside and eating. For me, I grew up just eating together and just being with my family, and just always we didn't really have a courtyard. We lived in a house, but I guess the garden area kind of formed as our courtyard. That's where everyone gathered. And yeah, upon arrival to the UK, I saw that, you know, takeaway, like you said, is always, you know, what is done. You always, it's not done as a community. It's not done communally. So I kind of wanted to bring that into my project and sort of bring that back out, because when I went to Ghana, like I said, most of the houses had a shop front where they're selling food, and they'll make food, and it's basically takeaway. And I didn't see a lot of compound cooking and compound just making food, and I just wanted to bring that back in my project. Yeah.
By providing opportunities, Diane.
By the way, the Beninois make the best touch in West Africa.
Oh, really? So we have to get the fat thatched roofers from there. If I could just make a point on this as well, Denver, I'm reminded of Adolf Loos, because he was kind of, I mean, you're kind of talking about culture and architecture, and it's kind of a chicken and egg question, which comes first? And I guess the culture always comes first. And Adolf Loos faced this problem when he came back from America to a kind of backwater of Vienna in the early 20th century. And so what he did, because he realized that the houses he would design there, no one would commission him to design those type of houses, right? Because of the kind of culture. So he actually started a magazine to educate future clientele, so that he could have the clients that he wanted to be able to design the houses which he thought were best. That's one thing. The other thing that comes to mind is when I first started going to the mosque a few years ago, I remember talking to some of the Pakistani brothers who had emigrated from, who had come to the UK from Pakistan. And everyone, when they come from the global south to the UK, they think it's going to be a better life, right? So my parents thought the same thing. But what they said was, we just work constantly. Back home, we used to be able to have a job, have family time, play cricket in the afternoon, etc., etc. So that kind of life, modern life, which is based on capitalism, has forced us into this thing now where we're all, you know, even in Ghana, we're eating takeaway, you know, and we don't have time for anything, and it's changing the culture. And in a way, there's not a lot that architects can do about it. I think we just have to admit that. Joe?
You can try.
Yeah, well, you know, you can do something as human beings, perhaps. More.
Yes.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think for me, when looking at the courtyard, although, you know, with modernization, everything's becoming faster, and therefore cooking as well. But I think one of the things that we realized when looking at the courtyard is that it's quite a dynamic space and multi-used. And when visiting Ghana, I think this is where my interest came in in washing clothes and drying clothes is that the new cooking, in a sense, is become this ritual of washing and drying your clothes and making that a kind of a communal aspect of one of the last things where people still take time and slow down. And every courtyard and house that we came to, the space where people came together was where they were washing and drying their clothes. And when we visited the Kunst University, I believe it was on a Saturday or Sunday, the entire university were washing their clothes and drying it, and the entire courtyard of the university was everywhere was closed. And it was such a communal aspect that I think, although maybe that cooking has changed, I think that's one of the main things right now for me at least, that I took forth in the courtyard. And I think there will always be a use for it, because we will always try to use
the courtyard also, it's about the environment. This is where the breezes and all that also, if you want to do cross ventilation, you need a courtyard, right? And then you need the outside of the building, the air also for simple airflow. So the courtyard is got a multiple functions, which can never be negated, you know.
So it's climatic, social.
Absolutely, absolutely.
There was a photographer I met from London. His name was Inzagino Latif, and he did these portraits, these photographs of portraits of people in London from Eastern Europe, blankly sitting on their beds. And you would look at these like beautifully taken photographs, and you would ask, so what's so interesting about these photographs? But the story behind it was, and this is the commentary about moving from to greener pastures in a sense, and it was, is that my time up or something?
No, carry on.
And the commentary is about moving to greener pastures, but where they were spatially confined to was their bedroom, and on their bed is where they spent most of their time. And this idea of this utopia in another country was defined by this. And he took these photographs of many people just sitting on their bed in this, where the light was coming through the curtains, and very mundane background and ornaments and cupboards and beds and so on. But it was a very interesting spatial critique on moving from one space to another.
So we have the bed in London and the room in the passenger.
Correct.
In Ghana. I think we have one more question. That's a great point. It's great points there. Thank you, Denver. We have one more question from Alicia again. Just want to re-emphasize I think it's important actually she asked this. So Alicia. Yeah.
Hey everyone again. I just want to be able to understand funding structures for the course, because obviously it was crowdfunded. It was a crowdfunded initiative, and in terms of sustainability for the future of it, what do we need to be aware of as supporters, and how do we support what you're doing basically, so this actually is something that is long term?
I guess for us, one of the things that we decided to do early on was KU Backer, which is Kingston University's crowdfunding platform where alumni match any donations we raise. And part of that was normally the question around where students get to go. So that's always been limited, partly by travel restrictions and costs, but also I think more to the point about where people find suitable to travel. So, there were difficulties in arranging our field trip, making sure that everything came together. And I think that by being able to prove in a way that this initiative, traveling to Ghana and doing this work is viable in some ways, I think then there's a case to be made for looking elsewhere in architectural studies rather than just maybe Europe or just the places that we're more used to traveling. And I think in terms of funding structures, I guess to be very honest, we learned while we went along. Our students were very, they worked extremely hard to fundraise, put on events, and really that kind of collective effort, I think, was what has helped us.
But also, I think that we hope that it's also part of the universities kind of taking us on and allowing. I mean, it took 4 tutors, to make sure that this thing went ahead, and with the support of the head of the department of the architecture school as well, to make sure it went ahead. I really highly doubt we would have been able to do it without that support. So I think it's universities really trusting that these kinds of ideas are actual legitimate research proposals, and Nana and myself have applied for research funding at various institutions, and so far have not been successful. So I think it's also about these institutions, European institutions, but also international institutions, kind of seeing us as legitimate, which we hope that Studio kind of starts to do.
Now, it was not easy. The trip was almost canceled 3 or 4 days before. And we have to mention that our acting dean, Mandy Hugh, and Keith Brennan, who is head of academic registry, were the 2 that came through and were able to push the project through. So it took a lot of people, more than usual, to make this happen. So clearly it wasn't an easy path, but I think clearly from the results of the work, it's something we can go further and get support. And I'm very keen to do that. So Alicia, I'm glad you raised that question. It's a very important question because it's not something we want to see stop, right? It's something we definitely want to see grow. And I think with partnerships like Joe Ado with Aki Africa, with Nubuke Foundation, talking with Kopi, we're going to continue to build the partnerships as well, so that we can continue this project and go further with it. We're talking about possibly collaborating with students in Ghana in the next round. So yeah, that's where we are.
Great.
Thank you, everybody. This is such a great energy and atmosphere. Really great having everybody here. People hanging on way past the time. It's great.
I think it's probably time to wrap up now.
Yeah.
So thanks for everyone for coming, and hope you enjoyed it. And we hope we can do this again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rosie.
Everyone to a round of applause.
So can I say something? The key to all this is the key to the success is endowments, that can allow this to happen for the next 50 years,
I agree, Paul. I think we need to work on that.
It's a big, I mean, the HBCUs in America are going through this discussion right now, because schools like Harvard have endowments of, let's say, $30 billion, right? And the black schools have nothing. So how do you even compare, compete? I mean, how?
Sorry, I had to mute everyone, but Joe, unmute yourself again.
Harvard can live off its interest alone for the next 100 years, just off the interest.
It's a big fight, but we're up for the challenge, and yeah.
We have to be strategic,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're ready. We're ready.
And then team up. We have to create these coalitions of the willing. So one of the things I would love to do, Nana, is to introduce you to some of the historically black colleges in the States who are pursuing the same agenda also, And they all have the same problem.
Yeah. Brown and Duke.
You know, you have schools like Howard and Morgan State and on and on and on and on and on.
I taught at Howard for a little while.
Yes.
We lost you.
Nana's going to follow up on that, though, and yeah, definitely take it.
Right, we definitely will. All right, should we wrap up? Thank you.
Anyway, my final parting words are well done, and you know it's a tough journey, and this doesn't it doesn't happen overnight in terms of students' responses. You know, responding. Even in Ghana, the Ghanaian architecture students have challenges understanding their context and how to respond to it. You know, it's very difficult. You've done a masterful job. Well done.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. And that's for you, students. That's for you and all the work you've done.
You know, I would love to introduce you to students from the University of Munich who were also in Accra. And last week I saw their projects. You know, the students should talk to each other more. You know.
Absolutely, and with Zoom, it's all possible now, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Okay, Rosie, I think we can wrap up. We'll catch up with Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Yes, we'll catch up, everyone.
Absolutely.
Later. I have to go and see I have to go to the hospital now, so I'll see you guys later.
All right, Joe. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. Okay.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.